Kakadosh, Boker Or, Shavua Tov, Masechet, Batra Daf Yomi. We are on page Gimel Amud Aleph 83a1. We are going to be starting on Uchrav Yosef Milotnan. So we are 2, 4, 6, 7 lines down. 7 lines down, Uchrav Yosef Milotnan. If you remember, we were talking about the Shitav of Yosef and Shitat of Nachman and the Mishav Kilayim, and the Gemara is going to say as follows: Uchrav Yosef Milotnan. Right? Did we not come, right, and learn in the Mishnah, right, in Shitat Rav Yosef? He says, Rabbi Meir Rabbi Shimon Omrim, Hanoteat karmo shmoneh amot al shmoneh. If you're going to come and you're going to plant your vineyard, 8 amot by 8 amot, which means there's going to be a revach of 8 amot between each one. Remember, shura, 8 amot, and then another shura. We're talking about a vineyard. Shura, 8 amot, shura. Mutar le'avi zera l'sham, you're allowed to come and plant them between them, right? Why? Because even in this shiur, which their distance, right, it still has a shem kerem. So therefore, each one is called a gefen in itself. So therefore, according to these Tanaim, it's dafka if it's less than 8 amot, is it considered a sadeh? But if it's going to be separate, it's like each one is a separate gefen, each one, because there's 8 amot in between. So says the Gemara, Afilu hachi ma'aseh adif. What does that mean? Even if you're going to say such a thing, he says it's greater a ma'aseh, because when you have a ma'aseh which has a psak, right, we are going to be somech on that much more than other shikot. What does that mean? That means many times when you have a story that they actually pass in that way, that's it. Yeah, well, you could have a machloket A, B, C, D. You have a story that they pass in, that's it. Right? So he says, Bisham Rav Yosef, I understand according to Rav Yosef, Aliba de Shimon, right? And according to Shtat Rabbi Shimon, Shamin lemefuzarim, Shamin lemeritzufin, which means we learn Shitat Rabbi Shimon to do with nitiot mefuzarot, which means that how much do they have to be in order to be considered a sadeilan, and how much they need to be ritzufin in order to be considered a steilan. Mefuzarim, if it's going to be spread out, we already learned it, right? Because we already learned that it's going to be 8 amot. Ritzufin, it's going to be less than 4 amot. Ain't no kerem, it's not a kerem. These are the words of Shimon. Chachamim say it is a kerem. Beforehand, we were talking about the distance. That we said if you have one shura, 8 amot, and one shura, it's too far away from each other. You know what 8 amot is? 8 amot is 4 meters. Yeah, that's a lot, right? Remember a meter stick? Yeah, you're talking about like we're talking about 4 meters. That's a lot. So I'm looking at it as if it's another field, completely separate. This is one gefen, another gefen. But what happens if I do the exact opposite? I put one gefen. Mamash, 2 amot right beside each other. They're so close. Remember, we're talking about gifanim. Gifanim is not a tree of an apple tree that you can't, that the thickness is already, gefen, the orchards, the grapevines. So the grapevines, you could put them, so you came, mamash, you put them so close together. Yes. Yeah. That's why they have all the pictures always of the, so he comes and he says, right, 1 second, it's going to be less than 4 amot, it's not a kerem. Those are the words of Shimon. Chachamim come and they say, it is a kerem. But the middle ones, I take them away. So if I take away the middle ones, I'm only looking at the outer ones, and therefore it's kilu. There's no middle ones right in between. Ella, but according to Rav Nachman, Alibad Rabbanan, mefuzarin shamin. We did also learn what is mefuzarin, because he said it's 16 amot, not 8, 16 amot. Ritzufin mi shamin. But did we learn what it is? Ritzufin, how close together they are? We didn't learn that. So says the Gemara, it's svarahu. It's a svara. Rabbi Shimon palga, if Rabbi Shimon is always going to be half, the Rabbanan also is going to be half, right? Which means, right, one more time. Rabbi Shimon said 8. How much was Chachamim? Double, 16. So Rabbi Shimon was palga, was chetzi, the Chachamim. So he says, so too now, right, lefi Chachamim, the shiur tzfifut is going to be chetzi shiur pizur ha'efshari. So since we said that it's going to be until 16 amot, right, so it's going to be 8. Right? It's also going to be 8. It's not going to be less than that. Okay? Amar Rava. Rava comes down and he says, Hilchata, what is halacha? Me'arba amot ve'ad sheshesre, from 4 amot until 16, right? So from 4 amot until 16 amot, right? He comes and he says, right, that we're going to be paskening, that is halacha between them, which means mefuzarot. Halacha is like the story of Tzalmon, just like the Chachamim paskin, right? That as long as it's not going to be distant 16 amot, it's still considered together as a kerem or a sadeh, right? But to do with the sefifut, the halacha is like the story of the Ravata, which they said that if it's going to be more than 4 amot, it's not considered omdim le'aker, and therefore they could actually call it a kerem or sadeh ilan, meaning that sefifut is 4 amot. So 4 amot, and then the distance is going to be 16 amot. That more than 16 amot, it's not considered the same kerem, but if it's going to be less than 4 amot, right, you have a problem. So Tanya the Rava, we actually had a bright in accordance to Rava, kama yumekuravin arba amot, kama yumenuchakin sheshase. So exactly, meaning he made a pshara, because remember, according to Rabbi Shimon, it was 8 and then 4. According to Rabbanan, it was 8 and 16. We made a pshara, it's 4 and 16. So you need a pshara between both psakim. So that's what we're doing here as well. We're making it, this bright that was exactly like Rava, that we're making this type of pshara, that if it's going to be a sheshet se'amot, it is a karka, v'teilyanut shebenehem, v'fichach, and therefore yavash ilanu niktzas, yesh lo karka, he still gets the land. V'chot mikam, or yoter mikam, if it's less than 4 amot, or more than 16, or shelacham b'zeh chazer, you bought the trees separately. Meaning you brought the trees one, and then another, and then another. You didn't acquire not the karka, not the ilanot, the fichach, and therefore yevesha ilanu nitzatza lo karka. If it dries up or if it was cut down, so you do not get the karka. Fine. The bottom of page Gimel Amud Aleph. By Rabbi Yomi. Rabbi Yomi comes and he asks, Keshu moded, when you're actually measuring the distance, mimakom katzar moded, mimakom rachav moded. Where does he moded? From the thick part or the thin part of the tree? Right? Which means at the end of the day, right, you're going to start measuring from which part. So he says, right, as follows: Elmaleh of Gavia mibe katil, the Ravashi tashema harechuva shebagefen. Yeah, what does that mean? Harechuva shebagefen. We're talking about the gefen when they're going to come and they're going to be markiv, is grafting, and you put the two different things together. Okay. Eno model mikar sheni. You're only going to do it from the second ikar, which is like the thickness, which is a benoni, not from the bottom part, right? Which is and not from the top part. Meaning you're always going to take the middle ground. Yeah. So shomea, right? We're always taking from the middle ground. Okay. Fine. So by the Rabbi comes and he asks, imagine right now you're going to come and you're going to sell 3 evarim of 1 ilan. Yeah. Which means, right, you come and let's say 3, whether it's going to be branches or 3 things of the same tree. What's halacha? Do you also buy the karka? Do we go after the ilan gadol? That's where it came from? Or from an ilan echad, right? You don't get the karka, but it's 1 tree. We already said 1 tree, you don't get it. But maybe because each one made itself like a nut, it becomes like 3 trees. Meaning what happened was that you took these 3 different branches, and it's coming from the same tree, and now they're growing. So do I look at it at the end of the day, it's 1 tree? And therefore 1 tree for sure, en lecha karka, or do I look at it that now it's 3 separate trees? So Elmaleh of Gavia mibe katil, Ravashi tashema, ditnam, we learned in the Mishnah, mavrich shalosh kefanim. If you're going to come, you're going to be mavrich, the 3 different vineyards, you could still see the ikar, right? If they have from 4 amot until 8 amot mitzarfin, and if not, and mitzarfin, right, to make a keren. So therefore, we're not going to say that the shiur of the distance between them, right? So therefore, the same thing. Our Mishnah that teaches us that the Gefanim is going to come and it's going to be Ole Benifrad from the Aretz, and each one has a shoresh to itself. It's considered separate, and therefore you're going to have a vineyard. So even though they're connected on the bottom, doesn't matter. Each one is considered separate. It's considered 3 different trees, and therefore you have karka beneath them. Okay. So by Rav Papa asks, what if you sold 2 in the field, but 1 on the mitzah? Remember, in the field, we said that you get in between the field, right? Meaning like in between the trees. He sold 2 inside the field and 1 on the border line of the field. So what, he gets the entire thing? Or 2 within his own field and 1 in the field of his friend. What's the halacha? So take we don't have an answer to this. Meaning we're not going to say is everything going to meet staref or not, because since it's going to be far away, right? So therefore maybe it's not meet staref. I did sell you 3 trees, but the third tree was bichlal somewhere else, right? Whether it's going to be on the boundary or whether it's going to be mamash in somebody else's field. Okay, pigim mubets 83b. So by Ravashi asks, bor, right? When you have a pit of water, ma'ushet tafsik, right? Is it efsek? Pasek. Does it make a pasek? Meaning you have, right? Yeah, he says you have, right, the trees in the middle. So imagine you have one tree, a board, and then another tree. Is a mitzaref altogether, or do you say it's a pasek and now that's it? Or the same halacha would be a matanai, ma'ushet tafsik, or it should be ma'ushet tafsik, or richva dedikle. Richva dedikle is basically a whole bunch of palm trees together. Is it a efsek? Is it a pasek? Take we do not have an answer. Okay. So Hillel comes and he asks from Rabbi. Allah erez binehin. Right? If you have an erez, a cedar tree between them, now what's halacha? Okay, is that also going to be a efsek? So he says, Allah, he says, what do you mean Allah? It came out. It says reshut. Because if you're going to tell me that it came up afterwards, if he already had, one more time, I sold you 3 trees. The place between it is whose? It belongs to me. It's about 3 trees. The gray area, the gray was in between. It belongs to me. So if I say Allah, it means that all of a sudden a cedar tree comes up. If a cedar tree pops up, that belongs to me. So says the Gemara, Ela haya erez benen. You're right. It's not that it came up, but if not, it belongs to me already. If there was already a cedar tree there, is it a pasek? Ma what's halacha? Amarli, he says kana v'kana. For sure, you acquire the trees in between them, because the erez is not considered a hefsek, right? To stop them being considered a sedeh ilan. Not only is it not, he himself, it's actually sold with the trees and the karka. It says over here. Okay, it's actually sold with it. Okay, fine. Next, he says now, right? How do you have these 3 trees? Rav Amar Rav says it has to be a shar, a straight line. Shmuel says mishulash. That was the picture that we showed before. Mishulash is like a segel, right? A rectangle, right? That's a rectangle. Mishulash, a triangle. Sorry, not rectangle. Triangle, right? That's the okay. So Manda Amar kishura. According to the Manda Amar that says it has to be shaveh, right, like a line. So kol sheken chatzuvah, kol sheken if it's going to be a triangle, but the one that says the triangle kishura, no. What's the reasoning? Shum de mizra ben tayu, because the place in between them you could actually plant. So therefore, it's not a triangle. So in between, you can actually plant these things. So Matkif la Rav Menuna comes and he asks, according to the Mandam the Chatzuva, why didn't you plant in between? So he says, you could come and you could start planting, right? He says you could start planting in between. So you should have the karka. So Elmaleh says, Hanach lo chashive, meaning these ones, this is like it's like kutznim, they're not chashuv. So therefore the karka is not acquired with it. He says here that ilanot, ilan is chashuv, and therefore the karka is acquired with the ilan. Meaning anything which is important, it's going to be acquired with it. But anything that's not important, you're not going to have karka acquired with it. Okay, we're just going to do the Mishnah and that's it. Okay, so the Mishnah on the bottom of Pegim Mumbet. Mishnah says, if you're going to sell the head of a be'ema gasa. So remember, be'ema gasa is whether it's a shor or para, an ox or a bull, right, or a cow, yeah? Lo macharet raglaim, you didn't sell the feet, right? Why? Because basically, they're cut to themselves, basically. And if you don't sell them with the head. Macharet raglaim, if you sold the feet, you didn't sell the head. Macharet kaneh, you sold the reot. Reot are the lungs, right? He says, lo macharet kaved, you didn't sell the liver. Macharet kaved, if you sold the liver, lo macharet kaneh. Basically, each one of these things are considered separate entities. So therefore, when you sell one, you do not sell the other. Okay? Fine. Aval b'daka, but what about b'madaka? B'madaka is a keves or an ez, right? A sheep, a goat. So he says, macharet rosh, macharet reglaim. You sold the head, you sold the legs. Right? Macharet reglaim, but if you sold the legs, you didn't, meaning that if you sold the more important part, which is the head, you sold the legs. But if you sold the legs, you didn't sell the head. Macharet kaneh, macharet kaved, if you sold the lungs, you sold the liver. But if you sold the liver, you did not sell the lungs. Okay? Basically, these are different minhagim that we're talking about. Okay. Fine. Arba midot b'mochrin. You have 4 different midot b'mochrin. מה זה מוכרים? In the sellers. מכר לו חיטין יפות, נמצאו רעות, הלוקח יכול לחזור בהם. Imagine right now you're going to come and you're going to sell חיטין, but good חיטין, חיטין יפות, good wheat, and then they were found to be bad wheat. הלוקח יכול לחזור בו. So the purchaser, he could retract. רעות ונמצאו יפות, what if you sold them bad ones and they were found good ones? מוכר יכול לחזור. So the seller could retract. Why? Because at the end of the day, they were very, very good. רעות ונמצאו רעות, יפות ונמצאו יפות, nobody could retract. Why? Because that's exactly what you sold. You sold good ones, you got good ones, that's it, you can't retract. You sold bad ones, you got bad ones, you can't retract. Okay? What about if you sold them becheskat shemechatit, which is red, and they were found to be white wheat, or white and it was found red? It seems wood of the olive trees, and it was found to be sycamore trees. Sycamore trees found to be olive trees. It's wine, it was found to be vinegar, and it was found to be wine. Everybody could retract, right, in all of these cases. Okay?